It up.
Okay, so I'm a little late, as is usually the case, but I'm gonna get started anyways on the 2025 year ahead astrology forecast. Um, 2025 as a whole, when I look at 2025, it gives me like this sense of trepidation just because there's so much that's going to be happening in January or for the whole year. Um, yeah, and so we're gonna talk a bit about everything that's going on. I'm gonna go month by month. So for January of 2025, the first thing to kind of pay attention to is the nodes. So the nodes on January 11th are going to be switching from the sign of Aries and Libra to the sign of Virgo and Pisces. And the nodes are the points at which eclipses occur. So, this past eclipse season, we've had emphasis on the Aries and the Libra axis, and now we're shifting to the Virgo and the Pisces axis. Specifically, the North Node is going to be in the sign of Pisces, and then the South Node will be in the sign of Virgo. Virgo and Pisces are opposing signs, but they're both negative and they are both mutable signs. So the negative signs are signs that are kind of more inward focused and introverted. And then the mutable signs are signs that are adaptable and signs that are less resistant to change, right? Yeah. But the interesting thing about the node switching signs from the Aries and the Libra axis to the Pisces and the Virgo axis, um, the interesting thing kind of about this to me, it kind of signals this like slowing down almost. And it's kind of like this counter energy to the energy of like the outer planets switching signs to the more masculine oriented signs, right? We've got Pluto and Aquarius right now, which just entered Aquarius, and then we have Neptune entering Aries, and then we have Uranus entering Gemini. So those are all outward oriented signs, right? Those are positive signs. And basically what that means is that there's going to be like this increase in energy. There's going to be like almost like this speeding up. So the nodes, the north and the south nodes, switching signs to these more inward oriented feminine signs, it's kind of like helping kind of balance that. But it's very much this energy of like kind of like a calm before the storm, sort of. Um, right? The storm being the outer planets, moving signs. Yeah. And so, but Virgo and Pisces specifically, Virgo is about like being of material and practical service to others, and then Pisces is about spiritual service to like a higher power, right? So they're both service oriented signs. Virgo is just a little bit more practical and like earth oriented, and then Pisces is a little bit more spiritual oriented, right? But they're very interconnected. So that's the first thing to note is the nodes switching signs on January 11th. And then on the 19th, January 19th to 30th, there's what I'm kind of like, normally I wouldn't really be focused in on this, but there's sort of this like window of this like really potent Aquarius energy, like Aquarian energy. Essentially what's going to happen is on January 19th, the sun is going to enter into Aquarius right before the president enters office, right? So that's very interesting to me because I've talked a bit about why Donald Trump got elected and like astrologically why he got elected. And a lot of that has to do with Pluto being in the sign of Capricorn during the election, right? Pluto entered into Aquarius like in early 2024, and then it went retrograde and it went back into the sign of Capricorn, and it was there during the US presidential election. And Capricorn has to do with like old things, like old ways of being, right? It has to do with structure, it has to do with institutional power. And that was a major influence in who won the election this time around. But it's very interesting to me that right before he gets elected, the sun will be entering Aquarius, which is a very different sign than Capricorn. And I think that had Pluto been in Aquarius during the US presidential election, I don't think that Donald Trump would have won. But, you know, so basically the sun is shifting to Aquarius, right? Out of the sign of Capricorn into Aquarius right before he enters office. Okay, so that's something to me is kind of like, it's kind of like shaky. You know, it's kind of, there might be some instability there. And this is kind of further hinted at because a week or so later, there's this like a triple conjunction happening between the moon, Mercury, and Pluto, all in the sign of Aquarius, right? So those three planets are going to be conjunct one another right before, mind you, before we have a new moon in the sign of Aquarius. Okay, so pretty, like, it's very Aquarius, very Aquarian. And then the day after that new moon in Aquarius, we have the modern ruler of Aquarius going direct. So moving from that retrograde motion, that backwards motion, to that forwards moving motion once again on the 30th, January 30th. So all of this to me signals that there might be some sort of political instability happening around the time that Donald Trump enters office. Like there might be protests, there might be as there might also be some sort of like economic instability occurring during this time as well, because the moon and Mercury do have to do a lot with the market, right? And the movement of capital, right? Let's say. So, yeah, kind of look out for that late January time. There might be some stuff happening around then. Uh, yeah. And I know too, as well, his tariff plan was like the whole tariff thing that might play a significant role in how the US economy functions throughout uh, the year of 2025. So that's January. And then February, there's not that much like really happening in February. We have Jupiter going direct kind of near the beginning of the month. So again, Jupiter is retrograde right now, so it's in that backwards sort of motion, but it'll be moving forwards again early February in that prograde motion. And then we also have Mars going direct near the end of the month as well. So yeah, Jupiter going direct early February, Mars going direct later on in February, but not overall, not that much happening in February. March now, we have Venus going retrograde on the 1st of March. So that's going to be fun. And then on the 13th of March, we have a lunar eclipse happening in the sign of Virgo. And remember, I talked about the nodes having switched signs from Aries and Libra to Pisces and Virgo. So now we have this lunar eclipse happening in Virgo. Lunar eclipses happen at the full moon. And usually with a full moon, there is like some sense of like illumination, right? Because the moon is reflecting the light of the sun onto the earth, right? But with a lunar eclipse, what happens is the moon essentially gets like obscured by the earth. It's like caught in the earth's shadow, right? So the brightness of the full moon isn't able to be reflected, right? Because it's being blocked out by the earth. So basically that theme of illumination that you typically see with a full moon is dampened essentially during a lunar eclipse. But also during a lunar eclipse, there's sort of an enhancement of the dark, like lunar principle, as well as the earth principle. And again, because the moon is reflecting the sun's rays, the solar principle is kind of almost like blocked out. So during eclipses, this is also true somewhat for solar eclipses as well, but you get this enhanced, almost like feminine energy that happens at the eclipses during the eclipse portal. And you also get this, there's also like this liminality, like you're kind of in this in-between space during the eclipses, right? So that's happening on the 13th, March 13th. And then on the 14th, we have Mercury being the ruler of Virgo. So Mercury being the ruler of this Virgo lunar eclipse, Mercury goes retrograde, right? So overall, this lunar eclipse that we have happening in March is going to be very like reflective, like it's going to be a time to kind of turn inwards. Yeah. And then after that, after lunar eclipse comes a solar eclipse. So on the 29th, we have a solar eclipse happening in Aries, right? And solar eclipses, unlike lunar eclipses, are typically going to be happening, or they're always going to be happening, on the new moon. And when you think of a new moon, usually during a new moon, the moon is completely dark, right? So it kind of reflects the fertile land, the fertile earth, the ground in which you are planting the seeds, right? That's why new moons are always associated with like intention setting. So yeah. But as I said, a solar eclipse is not like this, right? During a solar eclipse, the backside of the moon is fully illuminated, and the moon is essentially blocking out the sun, right? So again, though, even though it's different, in the case of a lunar eclipse, you have the earth essentially blocking the moon, and in a solar eclipse, you have the moon blocking the sun. In both instances, the solar rays are not able to reach the earth, right? So basically, the solar principle is obscured in both instances, right? Which again, I talked about, that leaves room for more of this lunar influence and this earth based influence, right? But the eclipses in March are going to really highlight planning and impulsivity, okay? Because Virgo is all about cautious action, right? It's about coming up with a plan. It's very detail oriented, right? And then Aries is it's very fiery. It's often not as well thought out, right? But it's also very authentic, right? So we're getting this polarity between maybe needing to plan some things sometimes, and then maybe needing to act on other things, right? So yeah. And then on March 30th, this is kind of a big deal in the astrology world. March 30th, we have Neptune entering into Aries, right? So Neptune is one of the outer planets, one of the three outer planets. The outer planets are Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And the outer planets move very slowly. Okay, so they don't switch signs very often. They don't switch signs as often as the inner planets do. So that's kind of why the outer planets get this sort of like generational influence, right? They call them generational influences because they stay in a sign for a really, really long period of time. So you don't really see them switching signs and entering into new signs very often. So it's kind of like a rare occurrence. But it means that it's when they do switch signs, it means that it's kind of something that you should take note of, right? So Neptune in Aries, Neptune moving from Pisces into the sign of Aries, right? Neptune is the modern ruler of Pisces, and Neptune gets along really well with Pisces because it rules over Pisces. And Neptune entering into Aries is not like, it's not the best, right? Pisces is a water sign, and Aries is a fire sign. Those are very two different elements. But I mainly with Neptune and Aries, I think we're going to see an intensification of the climate impacts that we've been seeing, mainly because Neptune is the ruler of the seas, right? And Aries is very hot and temperamental. So when you kind of put those two influences together, you get this sense of like getting into hot water, right? In a literal sense and a metaphorical sense, right? So, like, on an interpersonal level and societal level, maybe we'll see an escalation in like conflicts, right? People being more like hot-headed about things and being more like upfront about things, but there is also going to be impacts when it comes to like nature, right? When it comes to like the seas, I think we're going to see a lot more hurricanes and that sort of thing happening. Yeah, maybe more wars potentially too, more conflicts between nations. I do, however, think that with Aries, with Neptune and Aries, there's like also this like motivation, there's an increased motivation to enact collective dreams. So, yeah, Neptune in Pisces is very, again, it's very natural, but it's also very like reflective, and it's very like kind of like stagnant, right? With Aries, there's like a very clear sense of direction and purpose. So that is one of the benefits of Neptune moving into Aries. And people will also be thinking a bit more clearly. I think currently there's kind of like this haze almost. And it feels like things are moving so slowly too, with both Neptune and Saturn in Aries. And it feels like Saturn has been, I mean, in Pisces, it feels like Saturn has been in Pisces for so long, but there's just this like, it's just so slow, right? And then Neptune moving into Aries is going to be very, 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 very quick. So things are going to speed up quite a bit. But then we have April. So that's late March, March 30th, Neptune in Aries. And then we have April. This theme is going to come up multiple times. This thing that we see in like early April. April 4th, we're going to see Saturn forming a sextile to Uranus. Okay. Um, Again, Saturn is the planet of structure, right? Uranus is the planet of freedom. So, structure versus freedom. Doing things the old way versus doing things the new way. But with this, there is also this sense of like the social being political, right? The social being represented by Saturn, right? Because Saturn is one of the social planets. And then the political being Uranus, right? I think the main kind of theme that we're going to be seeing with this theme is that there's this need for us to recognize that in order for us to generate social change, we need to kind of think outside of the box, right? We need to kind of come up with alternative plans of action and alternative ways of doing things, right? Because the way that we've been doing things so far hasn't really produced any results, you know? So, yeah. But because it's a sextile as well, unlike a trine is just like an aspect that just flows. Like it just, like it's like an innate gift, right? Whereas a sextile, you kind of have, like, there has to be some sort of work, right? That goes into this, you know? And then we also have on April 7th, we have Mercury, which went retrograde. It's going to be moving direct again. And then we also have Venus moving direct. Yeah. So basically from March 1st to March 12th, that's when Venus, or April 12th, that's when Venus is going to be retrograde. And then Mercury is going to be retrograde from March 14th to March, or April 7th. March 14th to April 7th, yeah. So they're not going to be retrograde for that long, which is kind of nice. I mean, Mercury's like, they're not usually retrograde for that long anyways, but yeah. May 4th, may the 4th be with you. Pluto retrograde, right? So yeah, the nice thing about this Pluto retrograde though is that Pluto isn't going to be like entering back into Capricorn. Like what happened earlier this year is that Pluto entered into Aquarius in January, and then it went retrograde right after, and then it was in Capricorn essentially for like most of the year, and then it went into Aquarius again, right? This Pluto retrograde, Pluto is just going to stay in Aquarius. So even though it's going retrograde, it's not like switching signs, which I think is nice. Because you're not getting like, I don't know, like whiplash. Like it's like energetic whiplash when the outer planets like go back and forth between different signs. At least I find that's the case. Anyways, yeah, May 4th, Pluto retrograde. May 18th, we have Jupiter forming a sextile to Chiron. This is an important one too for people to pay attention to. Um, Jupiter is the planet of like expansion. So Jupiter's role is to kind of expand whatever it touches, right? So with Jupiter and Chiron, you're going to see this enhancement of the Chironic principle. And Chiron is an asteroid that has to do with wounds, trauma, but also inner knowledge and the ability to heal oneself, right? Um, so there's kind of this need to really, during this period, um, work on accepting pain and work on accepting hurt, right? And also allowing yourself to kind of like be different from other people and be alienated from other people, right? Like there's this need to embrace kind of being a maverick, which is also what Chiron is said to represent, right? Um, and the thing is, if you don't kind of make peace with this at this time, it's going to show up later in the year because Jupiter forming a sextile to Chiron is still more on the positive side of things. But later on in the year, Jupiter is going to form a square to Chiron. So if you kind of don't really work on that self acceptance during this time, it might like kick your ass later down the line, so to speak, you know? Yeah. And then on, where are we? We're in April, no, May. May 24th, Saturn in Aries. Okay, so again, Saturn is the planet of structure, it's the planet of boundaries, it's the planet of institutions, of like, kind of like old things, right? Traditional things, and it's entering into the sign of Aries, right? So Aries is a sign of the individual, right? And so the major theme with Saturn moving into Aries is that there's kind of this need to structure our individuality and become clear in who we are as people, right? There's been a major emphasis these past few years with Saturn being in Pisces on like kind of like spiritual development and spiritual growth, right? And we've kind of been doing that, right? Like we've done the work, but now we need to like actually like apply it to ourselves, you know? Um Even still though, the thing with Saturn and Aries too is that Saturn is technically not like it's not great when Saturn's in Aries, right? Saturn is said to be in its like fall in Aries. And this is because again, Saturn is like it's structure, it's detail, and Aries is very impulsive, right? So impulsivity doesn't really mesh that well with like the nature of Saturn. So, yeah. Anyways, June 9th, then we're also getting Jupiter in Cancer. So this is very interesting as well. Is like late April we're getting that Saturn switching signs, and then early June we're getting Jupiter switching signs. And Saturn and Jupiter are both social planets, right? Saturn moving into Aries and then Jupiter moving into Cancer, right? And Jupiter typically stays like 1 year in each sign. And so Jupiter this past year has been in the sign of Gemini for pretty much this like entire year, right? And the thing is, Jupiter is actually in its detriment in the sign of Gemini because Jupiter is a planet that really likes to expand and really likes to explore like one particular avenue and one particular thing. But Gemini is very much not that. Like Gemini is very much like, it's a sign of the hobbyist, right? It's like you want to go out and you want to try all these different things, right? So Jupiter doesn't really blend very well with the sign of Gemini, right? So that's been this entire like year pretty much has been like that, right? Where we've been like too like just almost like distracted by like there's too many things to do. There's too many things like dragging our attention in one direction. But now with Jupiter in Cancer in June, it's going to be entering the sign of its detriment in Gemini and moving into the sign of its exaltation in Cancer. So, very nice, you know? And this is also the reason that Jupiter is exalted in the sign of Cancer is because growth, which is like the Jupiter principle, is most easily accomplished when we nurture things, right? Which is Cancer. Cancer is that nurturing principle. So, yeah, Jupiter, unlike Saturn, it's about expansion, right? And it has to do with law, it has to do with higher education, philosophy, religion, morality, etc., right? And with Jupiter in Cancer, there's kind of like this shifting of like values almost to things that are more empathetic, right? Um, and we're going to see that play out, especially in areas of law and areas of just like society's like ethical conduct, right? There's also going to be greater emphasis kind of placed on the family and on community and on healing. But we're also, I think, going to see maybe some like almost like an elevation of like motherhood and like mothering, right? Um yeah, so like maybe there's going to be something happening with regards to like women's rights or like parental rights, especially with regards to women. Um yeah. So yeah, there's like just this valuing of the maternal, right? Because mothers usually aren't highly valued, and I think Jupiter entering into Cancer is going to be like a shift in that regard. And then we're still in June. So on June 15th now, Jupiter and Saturn are going to form a square to each other. We actually just had this happening right before Christmas time. Like I think it was like Jupiter was forming a square to Saturn on Christmas Eve, and it was not fun. Like it was not, that was not a fun aspect, in my opinion. Um, but so whatever you've kind of seen emerge over the holidays may once again kind of rear its head in like mid-June, right? So kind of pay attention to that, right? Maybe like journal what this past like week or so has been like, and then see if you kind of see that a similar thing coming up again, you know? But the thing is too is with Jupiter and Saturn, this square this time around that we just had, it's, you know, in the sign of Pisces and Gemini, right? But in June, they're going to both switch signs, right? So there's going to be this tension placed now on this like Aries and Cancer area, right? So we've gone from this tension between the mutable signs, Pisces and Gemini, to this tension between the cardinal signs, right? So the mutable signs are all about change, you know, and the cardinal signs are all about initiative. So there's going to be like more action taken when it comes to resolving the tension that we feel, right? And Aries and Cancer is very much the energy of to fight or to nurture, to be aggressive or to be reflective, right? To prioritize the self and be selfish, or to prioritize the family and to prioritize others, right? There's going to be some tension there. And then after that, on June 18th, we have Jupiter forming a square to Neptune. So it's very similar to the Jupiter Saturn square, right? Because Neptune and Saturn are in the same signs, right? Um, but Neptune, the thing is, Neptune and Jupiter are kind of more aligned than Jupiter and Saturn, right? Jupiter and Saturn are opposing principles, Jupiter being the planet of expansion, Saturn being the planet of contraction, right? Neptune and Jupiter, on the other hand, are both the co rulers of Pisces, right? So they have more in common than Jupiter and Saturn do, but in this particular instance, Neptune is going to be more aligned with Saturn, right? Since they're both in Aries. So what this indicates to me is that the urge to act and to be the shaper of one's own destiny is going to be much stronger than the urge to be passive, right? And this is kind of like a major theme for this whole year, right? There has been this energy of passiveness, right? Of like being reflective, of doing the internal work, of turning inwards, right? And we've done that. We've been doing that for quite a while, right? Now there's this energy behind it. There's like this oomph behind it where it's like now it's like let's go, like let's do the thing. Like let's actually like do something, and this is going to be a really widespread like feeling both on like an individual and a societal level, right? I think it's going to have major impacts, right? And I think I would encourage people to act intentionally, right? And don't be impulsive. Act with intention, right? Have intention behind each of your actions. So, yeah. And then July now. So, what were we? June, July, crazy. July 4th, Neptune goes retrograde. So, it's moving forwards and then it's going to start moving backwards, basically. Not that big of a deal. Planets are always going retrograde and going direct. But yeah, more reflection, right? Anytime a planet is going retrograde. And then July 7th, this is another big one, major one for 2025. Uranus in Gemini, right? So not only has Pluto just entered into Aquarius, right? Like just like last month, but now in 2025, we're literally getting both like Jupiter and Saturn entering into new signs. And then we're also getting Neptune entering into a new sign. And then we're getting Uranus entering into a new sign. So it's like bam, 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 bam. It's like there's no breaks. It's like it's like gonna be crazy. I can't even like I don't even want to predict what's gonna happen because it's gonna be 10 times crazier than anything I could come up with. But anyways, Uranus in Gemini. Uranus likes to be in Gemini. Like Gemini is an air sign, right? Uranus is the modern ruler of Aquarius. The issue is Uranus can basically do whatever it wants in the sign of Gemini. You know what I'm saying? Like Uranus is about freedom. So it's like mutable freedom. It's like unrestrained chaos essentially when Uranus is in Gemini, right? And this kind of explains why the past 3 times in modern history that Uranus has been in Gemini, it has not been good. Okay, it happened. Uranus was in Gemini during the American Revolution, the American Civil War, and then World War II. Okay, so like I don't even know what to say here. Like Pluto is entering into the sign of the revolutionary. It has just entered into the sign of the revolutionary in Aquarius, and then Neptune is going to enter into the sign of the warlord, right? The sign of Aries, and now we have Uranus entering into the sign of unrestrained chaos. You know what I'm saying? Like it's very much like World War III, like mass destruction, but also mass resistance too. So, it's gonna be like, yeah, it's gonna be insane. Like I don't even know what to say. Like it's just gonna be crazy. Like, but it has been crazy. Like it's gonna be even crazier than this year. This is why everyone is saying 2025 is gonna be so like so insane. It's like my brain is already broken though from everything that's happened in 2024, and it's like now in 2025 it's gonna be like astrologically it's looking even crazier. Anyways, July 12th, Saturn retrograde. And then on the 17th, we have Mercury retrograde. And then on the 30th, we have Chiron going retrograde. Which I think, like, we're seeing, like, a lot of this theme play out of, like, the outer planets entering into new signs, into these really, like, active signs. But then we're seeing, like, this... whoopsies. We're seeing this need to, like, pull back, too, right? So it's, like, there's all this energy. There's, like, a burst of energy. But then there's... The universe is kind of also, like, pulling back. So it's like trying to, like, the universe is kind of trying to calm things down. We'll see if that's successful or not in calming things down, but there is that. And then in August, again, this is what I was saying earlier, right? Saturn, we're going to see Saturn forming a sextile to Uranus again, right? This is the same thing that we saw on like April 4th. So the universe does this a lot. It'll give us like the same planetary alignments to work through, and it'll do that like multiple times. You know what I'm saying? Um so yeah, basically you're going to see that again. So whatever was happening on April 4th is going to be reoccurring again in August. Okay. So again, it's this theme of like structure and the structure of society, right? That's Saturn. But then there's also this need to change, to implement change, right? Uranus, right? So there is going to be like a lot of like, I think, activism and stuff happening, and like social justice stuff happening this year that we're going to see come up. Um, and it's a very powerful year for that. Like there is going to be like a lot of like turmoil potentially and a lot of conflict, but there's also so much potential for change in 2025 that I see. And it's like very hopeful, right? Like it is going to be crazy, but there's also like an insane amount of hope buried in all of this mess, you know? Um so yeah, but yeah, pay attention to those reoccurring themes, right? So the Saturn sextile Uranus, April 4th, August 11th, those 2 dates are going to be very interconnected. Um, and then on August 28th, we have Uranus sextile Neptune. We're going to see this again. This is going to be one of those reoccurring aspects. Oh, thank you. That's so sweet. Um, yeah, Uranus is the thing about Uranus is that Uranus is as much about spiritual awakenings as it is about progressive social change. Like Uranus really is an awakening influence in astrology. Um, but that's the thing too, is social change and the psychic realm, right? That being Uranus being that social stuff, and then Neptune being that psychic stuff, right? They're very much intimately linked, right? So, in order to become enlightened individuals, we also need to be connected to the plight of like marginalized groups, marginalized people in society, right? Um, because it's the ability to think outside of the self, right? It's the ability to experience that unity with other people, right? um and this is kind of going to be like amplified during this time, right? There's going to be a lot more desire for us to empathize and align ourselves with the plight of the people who have been pushed to society's margins, right? There's this like acceptance of the other happening, which is very nice. And it's also, I think, going to be a time to like illuminate those figures and those people who engage in like toxic positivity, or who spiritually bypass, right? um because the thing is, we need to be socially aware, right? We need to put social things and other people above our own spiritual egos, right? And I do think that there is a lot of that in the spiritual community, is like spiritual ego, right? um yeah, with Uranus and Gemini too, right? Uranus in Gemini sextiling Neptune in Aries, right? With Gemini, there's Gemini is a sign of knowledge, right? So knowledge and awareness will give us the power to fight so that we can secure a more loving, harmonious future with other human beings. And we're going to see that come up again in November, that Uranus sextile Neptune. August 28th, it's going to happen again in November. So if there's any sort of theme that you specifically see for yourself coming up, make note of that because it's going to come up again. And then in September 1st, Saturn, which went retrograde, right? It's moving like backwards. It's going to go back into the sign of Pisces, right? So there's going to be more receptivity, more introversion, more time to continue developing spiritual gifts, right? As well, the universe is kind of giving you the opportunity to reckon with something you may have missed during Saturn passing through Pisces that first time, right? So it's kind of like giving you an extra opportunity to pay attention to something, right? And then September 5th, we have Uranus going retrograde, right? So going from that prograde motion, that forwards moving motion, back into that backwards moving motion. And then on September 7th, it's eclipse season again, September eclipse season again, happy eclipse season, lunar eclipse in Pisces, right? And Pisces, again, all about spirituality, all about meeting the collective shadow, dissolving boundaries, being of spiritual service, right? And the thing is, too, as I touched on earlier about the nature of eclipse and how eclipse are essentially this period where there is like extra liminality, right? Like there's this sense of being in a liminal space, being in the in-between. And with a lunar eclipse that's already very liminal, and you're getting it in Pisces, also a very liminal sign. So it's like very, 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 very strong liminal energy, right? And then on the 21st, again, what follows a lunar eclipse is a solar eclipse. We have a solar eclipse in Virgo, right? And this is kind of something to take note of, right? Because we have a Virgo lunar eclipse earlier in the year, right? And then later in the year, we have a Virgo solar eclipse, right? So again, there is that idea that you may see something reoccurring, like a reoccurring theme. Yeah, but the thing I want to touch on too with eclipses are gateways, they are portals. They're represented by the Ouroboros, like the snake, like the symbol of the snake eating its tail, essentially. Like, essentially an eclipse is like it's like the planet moving through the mouth of the snake and coming out through the tail, right? Something that goes in comes out, right? But what I want to say here is that eclipses are a natural transmutation process, okay? And what I mean by that is that you don't need to do anything extra during an eclipse in order for the eclipse to work its magic, right? People are always like, what do you want to let go of? What do you want to let in? And it's like, during an eclipse, like, you should just chill, literally, like just lie in bed, don't do anything. Like, you don't need to do anything. It's just this natural energetic process. You don't need to aid it necessarily, right, in order for it to actually do its thing, you know? Like, our bodies are always doing that just naturally, right? Our bodies are always like processing things and bringing things in. We bring food and nutrients in and then we excrete it out, right? It's like a natural thing. Like, there's nothing that you really need to do to help that along. Like, sometimes maybe you do, but usually you don't, you know, if you're like a healthy individual. So just saying, you know, just maybe this eclipse season you should just not do anything and you should just calm down. That's my advice. I mean, if you want extra credit points, then sure, go for it, but I'm not doing anything. Anyways, September, that's September. October, Pluto direct. Pluto was retrograde, now Pluto's direct. But it's not switching signs anymore, like I said. So it's kind of nice, right? Because we don't have that energetic whiplash, you know what I'm saying? And then October 22nd, Neptune moving retrograde is going to move back into the sign of Pisces, right? So we're getting this like Pisces Aries, and it's going to be kind of annoying in a way. Like it's very much like Aries, because Aries is the start of things and Pisces is the end of things, right? So again, there's this sense of liminality, right? For lack of a better term, right? We're on the threshold, right? We're standing at the gates of something amazing and great. But we've got to go back and we've got to go back a bit and see old lessons and old patterns and like address that, right? Before in 2026, I hope at least that things will be moving more, you know, it'll be like bam, bam, bam in 2026. In 2025, there is a bit of that. There's a bit of that. There's some speeding up happening, but there is still like this like reflective part of it too, you know? Yeah, but it's frustrating. Like being at the threshold of something kind of sucks. Like it does suck because you're like, oh, I'm like, I can sense that something really good is gonna come, but it's like I'm just stuck here like revisiting old patterns, like doing the work. Like it's kind of boring, you know. Anyways, yeah. October 23rd, then we have that Jupiter square Chiron, which I talked about before. Well, it wasn't a Jupiter square Chiron, it was Jupiter sextile Chiron. And I said to people during that time, I said that you really want to work on your self-acceptance there, because if you don't work on that there, then you're going to see it come up again. Where was that? That was Jupiter. I literally don't know. I lost. Oh no, May 18th. May 18th, Jupiter sextile Chiron. Right? So May 18th, that's the time you want to work on that self-acceptance, accepting your weirdness, accepting yourself for who you are, accepting that maybe sometimes you are going to feel like a social outcast, and that's okay, you know? Because if you don't do that, then in October, the Jupiter Saturn square is going to hit you a lot harder, you know? It's sort of like the way that I see this square, Jupiter Chiron square. The way that I see this square is it's kind of like the price of conformity. If you don't accept your uniqueness, the universe will force you to repeatedly confront it, right? In a way that is not the nicest, you know? But it's also about time too. It's about giving yourself the time to actually heal, the time and the space to heal. Because a cut doesn't heal instantaneously, it takes quite a while. So, yeah. And then in November, we're almost done. November 7th, Uranus retrograde will move into Taurus. So anything kind of like aggravated, I said that Uranus and Gemini is like Uranus can basically do whatever it wants, and that's true. And Uranus and Gemini causes a lot of chaos and a lot of disruptions looking at the history of it. But there's kind of like this it's going to be put on hold. Like all of that destructiveness, that chaos is going to be put on hold temporarily when Uranus moves back into Taurus. I do think, you know, Taurus again is a sign of the land, land ownership. So maybe there's like land disputes that are kind of being resolved in some way. That's a possibility. Maybe things like indigenous sovereignty, maybe indigenous people are given more of their land back, that sort of thing. That would be nice to see. November 9th, Mercury goes retrograde. Then November 11th, Jupiter goes retrograde. Right. 20th of November, then, what did I say? Uranus sextile Neptune again. Once again. So the same thing as we saw on August 28th, right? Again, Uranus, the great awakening power, the great awakener, and Neptune, the spiritually enlightened individual, you know? Uranus, again, being about change, about social change, about collective empowerment. Neptune being about connection to a higher power, and how those two things are interrelated. How being an active part of your community is going to allow you to become better spiritually. You're going to see that reoccurring again in November, in late November. And then November 27th, we have Saturn direct. Great. December 10th, Neptune is going to go direct. Woohoo. December 21st, again, Jupiter square Chiron. So, same thing as October 23rd. So we're getting a sextile between Jupiter and Chiron earlier in the year, and then later on in the year, we're getting a square between Jupiter and Chiron, right? So during that sextile between Jupiter and Chiron, again, you really want to work on self-acceptance. You really want to work on allowing yourself to be different, because it's going to come back to bite you in the butt later on. But yeah, that's pretty much the entirety of 2025. I went through this a lot faster than I thought I would. But yeah, if there's any questions, you can drop them down below. I usually post these also to my Instagram afterwards. So yeah, that's 2025. It's going to be a big year, that's for sure. Well, thank you to everyone who popped in, and I will see you all again very soon. I'll probably be doing like an in-person Astro Meet in January again. So yeah, see you then. Oh, whoopsies. I completely forgot to shut this one.